boy, so get this right. You wanted to deep dive into Einstein, not the typical, textbook stuff. And you sent in this really cool imagined interview with him.
Yeah.
Which I have to say is a super creative way to get inside the mind of, well, Einstein.
It really is. It's like this fictional dialogue gives us this like really unique perspective, not just on like the science itself, but how his ideas have kind of, echoed through time.
Totally. And what really struck me right off the bat was how this interview jumps right into some seriously complex stuff. I mean, space-time, warping the fabric of the universe. It's like mind-blowing.
And what's amazing is how, even though it's such a mind-bending idea, he manages to like simplify it without making it sound simple. Like that whole analogy of the warped fabric, it helps us visualize how gravity messes with time itself.
Right.
Like near a black hole, time actually slows down. It's like total science fiction, but it's, real science.
It really makes you think, like, what must people back then have thought when he first started talking about this stuff? But, one thing that I found surprisingly relatable was how even Einstein talks about getting lost in his work. Like, even a genius struggles with work-life balance.
Totally.
Yeah.
And his whole thing about quantum mechanics, like when he said, God does not play dice, that shows a whole other level of like internal struggle, right? It wasn't just about the science. It was his whole philosophy. The idea that the universe could be random. That really bothered him, huh? And it's funny because that ties directly back to you, like you're super interested in free will, right?
Oh, for sure.
This whole debate, like, do we have control or is everything predetermined? It all goes back to that fundamental question of a deterministic universe versus one with, pure chance.
Wow, I never even connected those dots. It really shows how these massive scientific concepts, they actually directly affect how we think about our own lives.
Yes.
And what I find really refreshing is that, he don't pretend to have all the answers. Like, even Einstein admitted there were things he didn't fully understand.
Oh, yeah, and the interview really captures that.
Yeah.
Like, he emphasizes how doubt is actually, crucial to the scientific process. He even talks about how when he first came up with his theories, they were met with, a ton of skepticism. For him, a true theory. It could handle being questioned.
And that's such a good lesson for all of us, not even just, scientists, right? Being open to being wrong and then using that to learn and grow.
For sure.
But it's also cool how he gives credit where it's due. Like he mentions Newton, Maxwell, even Spinoza, the philosopher, right?
Yeah.
He recognizes how their work influenced his own thinking.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even someone like Einstein, right? He didn't just exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Knowledge builds on what came before it.
Yeah.
Every single discovery, it has roots in the past, And that's something to keep in mind, especially as you're on your own learning journey, right?
For sure.
You're never truly starting from scratch.
Yeah. It really makes you realize, even the greatest minds, they're built on the work of others. It's kind of humbling.
It really is. And, speaking of, building on ideas, this interview gets into something that's relevant to everyone, not just physicists.
Yeah.
The whole ethics of science thing.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like how he uses nuclear power as an example, right?
Exactly.
This idea that it can, provide energy, but also, massive destruction.
Right. It's this, powerful reminder that knowledge without responsibility can be a pretty dangerous thing.
For sure.
And it kind of forces us to ask these tough questions, right? Just because we can do something scientifically, does that mean we should? Makes you wonder, what would Einstein think about some of the ethical dilemmas we're facing today, right? All the stuff with artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you were just telling me the other day about your concerns with AI bias and all that.
Yeah, it's true. And it's if something like splitting an atom has all these ethical gray areas, right? Imagine creating something that could be potentially smarter than us. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Definitely. And, that kind of ties into another interesting thing this fictional Einstein brings up.
Okay.
It's the whole relationship between science and spirituality. He mentions that he doesn't necessarily believe in a personal God, but he still finds this this awe-inspiring feeling in the order and beauty of the universe,
It's he even says something about understanding the laws of nature is reading the mind of God. It's a pretty powerful way to describe that search for deeper meaning.
For sure. And, it kind of hints at this idea of pantheism, right?
Okay.
It's that philosophy we talked about before with Spinoza, where the divine is kind of inseparable from nature itself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about how that perspective could inform how we approach all these ethical questions, especially with, science moving so fast.
So it's not about seeing science and spirituality as being at odds with each other, but more like they can actually kind of work together.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance. And speaking of balance, we can't forget about that little detail in the interview about Einstein being a musician.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to picture him, playing the violin when you're so used to thinking about him and all those, like, crazy equations.
I know, right? But it's a perfect example of how these totally different fields, they can actually, like, overlap and influence each other. He even talks about music having this mathematical beauty. It's like he saw these patterns and structures everywhere he looked, whether it was physics or, a melody.
It's pretty inspiring, honestly. Like, no matter what you're into, you don't have to fit into just one box,
Totally.
You can be a scientist and an artist, or like any combination you can imagine.
Right. It's like he's showing us that everything's kind of, connected in a way.
Totally. And for someone like you who's always like exploring and making these crazy connections, I bet that's like super exciting to think about.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what else really struck me about this interview?
What's that?
It's not just about, like, the specific things Einstein discovered, right?
Yeah.
It's more about, like, how he thought, how he approached the world.
Yeah, for sure. Like, he was all about that curiosity.
Exactly. He saw that as being, like, the driving force behind, everything. Not just scientific discovery, but, like, personal growth, too,
Huh.
Always asking why. Just like you did when you asked for this whole deep dive on Einstein.
Ah, that's so true.
You were curious, so you went for it.
And, it also reminded me of something else he said in that interview, like about not being afraid to, to mess up sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Imagine that. Einstein telling his younger self to, like, embrace failure.
I know, right? It's actually kind of freeing when you think about it.
Totally. It's like this reminder that setbacks, they're going to happen to everyone. But they're also, like, these amazing opportunities to learn and grow from,
Totally. And it applies to, like, everything, not just science.
Absolutely.
So, wow, okay. We started with this, like, fun little interview with Einstein, right? But we ended up going so much deeper. Like, we talked about his life, his ideas about science, ethics, even, like, spirituality.
I know, right? It's amazing how much we unpacked from just that one fictional conversation.
And it all started with your question.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, right? We get to take these fascinating topics and explore them through the lens of, well, your curiosity. And along the way, we find all these hidden connections, these like aha moments that make it all worthwhile.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, we went from like warped space-time to AI ethics to even like finding beauty in music and the laws of the universe. What a ride.
Seriously.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you're left with a little bit of that, like that sense of wonder,
Yeah.
and the desire to just keep exploring and asking questions. Like Einstein said, never lose that spark of curiosity.
Yeah.
Because that's what keeps us learning, growing, and seeing the world in new and like totally amazing ways.
Couldn't agree more. This
Yeah.
has been an awesome deep dive for
Well.
sure. Keep those requests coming.